Okay, welcome everybody to today's interest session. This is creating web applications with C# and ASP.NET. This is part of ETIC's, the Entrepreneurship and Technology Innovation Center here at Harry Scher Hall in room 107 and room 607 and 1855 Broadway in the city campus. The interest program is geared to deliver remote sessions in technology for students that may not be aware that there are certain proprietary technologies that are in high use, heavily used in industry, that those applications alone could be a career in themselves, right? We see things like full stack developer, which is someone who can do kind of all parts of a full application development. And that's great, but sometimes just one or two applications, if you become really, really good at them, they're just, a very healthy career just in themselves. So this session is geared around doing all kinds of different technologies that are out there that make sure you're aware of them, make sure you know how to engage with them and use them, and make sure that you know kind of what careers are available. So today we're going to focus on C# and ASP.NET. Which is part of Microsoft's development suite, and Microsoft's development suite called Visual Studio. It's the IDE, the integrated development environment called Visual Studio, and it's the #1 IDE in the world. The reason, market share wise, and the reason is that in one spot you can develop applications that run across multiple platforms, system agnostic platforms, applications, and once you learn the actual syntax of C#, which is the actual code that uses the code behind as far as the web forms and things like that, once you learn that, overall, whatever application you're developing for whatever platform, it becomes very easy to use. Once you learn it once, you can apply it to all these different areas. So it's very popular, very powerful, and today I'm going to show you kind of a background as far as what the career aspect might look like, but also kind of what it looks like, how to get it, how to download it, how to use it. I'm going to show you some demos. We use it all the time in ETIC for our prototyping, and I'm going to bring you up to a couple of different new forms that we're creating actually realistically in the ETIC now for a product. So we're going to use that as one of our examples. Okay, so let's get started with some basics. If you want to learn more about ETIC, you can kind of access us at any of these QR codes or these websites. Our ETIC website will give you links to everything, but you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at NYIT ETIC, and you can access our Ursula robotics project and program, which we're going to make some changes on today at nyit.edu/Ursula. Okay, so first and foremost, C# is a C family of languages. So you have C and Java and C++ and C#. Those languages are very similar syntax-wise. The way the packages and classes and methods and functions are all designed, and the way loops and conditionals and variables are all defined is almost exact between the different flavors of C, of those languages. So it's very easy to learn one once you learned one of the others. But the differences come in kind of what packages they have, what platforms they run on, things like that. So C# is Microsoft's version of C, and it uses something called ASP.NET, Active Server Page.NET. So whenever you're developing an application, you can develop it in 1 tier, 2 tiers, or 3 tiers. So 1-tier applications are based on applications that are the data and the presentation layer and the application all run on one layer. And the client server, where the application runs on one machine and the data resides on another, and then 3-tier, which is where the application, the data layer, and the presentation layer all reside on the same platform, either a single server or a server farm. But overall, everything is in one place. That's where most of the applications today lie as far as browser-based type applications, right? Today's session is on how that works, how it all talks to each other, how you distribute it, how you make one change and 11 billion people get that change at the same time, It's really unprecedented how we can develop applications at the speed we can develop applications and upgrades today that we could never do for years and years and years. So just from a career perspective, if you look at like a C# developer, very, very healthy, kind of salaries and packages. And don't forget, if you have companies with a 401k match, you're also they're also giving you an extra match on top of that. Some of these companies that you'll see in LinkedIn, Indeed, as an example, right here, they'll offer that package. They'll offer stock options and bonuses and other stuff too. So it's really important to realize that, being the most popular IDE and platform out there, to have this kind of skill set and have this ability to know how it works is pretty important career-wise, to make sure you don't miss those opportunities. So a little bit of background on the languages, right? If you look, the C#'s down there at the bottom as far as the most popular languages. And one of the reasons is that's proprietary. So it's Microsoft's language. So if you decide to build a company and your model is build to sell like over 5 years, if you choose proprietary languages and then models, those they could cause issues with your company valuation. So they may not be the best choice for you. So a lot of times, as far as people choosing a language to build a new application, is going to run on any system in the world and be license free, essentially, using Python, using Java, using all these different kind of open source type languages, is going to be different than using a Microsoft based language. So, but what you will see is the IDE being the most popular IDE in the world, because you can build all different applications together. C# becomes very, very popular internal in organizations. So whenever you have an organization that's writing internal software all the time, like custom-based software to manage their warehouse, and which is incredibly popular, incredibly common, Visual Studio and C# is essentially the platform that they use. So you may not, find that you're, getting a lot of offers in this area from companies that are developing new technologies that are going to be basically part of a company that's going to be sold eventually. But what you'll see is that internally, whenever you have an internal software development or an IT company that's doing a lot of their own development, this is one of the more popular platforms for it, and you'll see. All right, so C#, coding wise, is a version of C. It just happens to be Microsoft's version of C, and it interacts with the ASP.NET platform of libraries, which is everything from drop downs to text boxes, to radio buttons, to data access and grid and access to data database management systems, right? So everything that's available for your application to attach very easily to other things and interact with them is part of the ASP.NET library. And C# interacts with ASP.NET, which is why it's its own version of C. Right. So a quick concept of what we're talking about today, as far as database, as far as application design. You're going to be designing, in a two-tiered application, you design a client, meaning the software runs on the actual desktop or even a phone, but the database itself, where all the data resides, is on the server, and they're talking to each other. The issues with these two-tier architectures is that whenever you want to do an upgrade, that upgrade has to get pushed to all the different clients that are currently using it. So if somebody's using version 1.25 of a software and you want them to have 1.26, you have to make sure that all those different devices get that new application before they start using the system again. Otherwise, they'll still have the bug while other people don't have the bug, and so forth. It could cause a lot of issues. So client server is still and two-tier architecture is still in use quite frequently, but it's also troublesome, because whenever you want to do an update and upgrade somewhere. Today, many of these applications are three-tiered applications, right? Where the application, the client, and the database itself all reside in the same layer. So what it means is that you create your database structure, which is things like SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, Mongo, right? All these different database platforms where the database resides in its own platform, its own software, it's its own world, and the application that runs, the coding of it that attaches to it and manipulates that data is also there. But the presentation layer, the interaction, the user interfaces, the forms, the the graphics, everything else that you want people to see also resides there. And when you build in the three-tiered architecture, which is what you're going to see today with web applications, once you make a change at that level once, if you have 11 billion users possible today, however many devices we have today, maybe upwards toward 20 billion today, any one of those devices, the next time they actually access your server, they're getting that update, right? So it's a very, very powerful tool and very powerful way to program. And it's really kind of the way everything is done today, and the way what companies are looking for you to think, to take into consideration when you're designing your applications. Okay, just another example or sample of the three-tier application. All right, so let's break into a demo and see what it looks like. I'm going to access my my demo server here. See if I can maximize this for a second. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize Visual Studio for a second, because I want you to see that this particular machine that we're on is a Windows server, very similar to a Windows 10 machine or a Windows 11 machine, the user, but the functionality of these servers are very different. They host web-based applications, they host database applications and everything else. So they look very similar, and you can use them very similar, but to another Windows machine, but their purpose in their operating system is extremely different, the way it distributes data. So whenever you're talking about real applications running in the cloud, you would get your version of Windows Server or a Linux-based server in the cloud, where Amazon Web Services is hosting it, or Google Cloud is hosting it, or whatever it might be. But it's a real virtual image running in the cloud. But just so you're aware, when we're talking about this, building applications that are available to the world, we're still talking about a server. We're still talking about a desktop, a server device somewhere running an operating system like Windows Server, or like Linux, or an Apache web server, or an IIS web server. So all those different core pieces still means there's a machine on the internet running this stuff and hosting it while everyone else is talking to it. So just keep in mind, there's a very base level functionality here. Now, that being said, the software, when you actually go to Visual Studio, we're using an older version here to do the demo, since it's our demo server. But Visual Studio, once it loads up, this is the IDE, the Integrated Development Environment, that you would use to basically design a new application, right? So anytime you go to File, you'll see very similar to anything else you've used in the past. I want to make a new project, right? I want to go to this current project and add a new item into the project. So all these different components of how you would build in Visual Studio are extremely common to what you would do in any other application. So there's nothing magical there. So what we'll do for starters is I'll show you what it's like to build a new project, but we're going to actually make a real change in something we call Ursula, which I'll bring up. If you're not aware what Ursula is at New York Tech, I'll bring it up in a second to show you kind of what we do with it. But if we go to project here, or if we go to file and we go to new project, the first thing you'll see in Visual Studio is that pretty much anything that you can envision, this doesn't have everything installed, but anything that you can envision project-wise, you can build with Visual Studio, right? So you don't have to think like, oh, I got to use this application to build an Android. I got to use this application to build an iPhone app. I got to use this application to build an iPad app. I got to use this application to build a desktop app. If you decide that you want to build a console app that is like just a background running executable that does a whole bunch of automation, that copies files, deletes files, renames files, does a whole bunch of different stuff that just runs in the background. Console, it doesn't need a user interface. Console app would be the one you would do. If you want to use a Windows Form app, which will actually create like a desktop app that's very much loaded on your local desktop, we're going to create something called an ASP.NET web application today. That's really what we're working in. And just so you're aware, like whenever you deal with web app in Visual Studio, if you chose to build like an Apple TV app or an Apple Watch app or an iPhone or iPad app, right? So Visual Studio is very, very powerful in that it has the ability to to create applications in the same environment that you're used to, and get very fast with it, get very proficient with it, but you're building all these different types of apps and different operating systems. It becomes a very powerful tool. The other thing it has a bunch of emulators. So like you can actually, without ever really attaching to an iPhone, without ever really attaching to an Android phone, you can go and test that right in your development environment. Okay, so all these different things, just as far as Visual Studio goes, are available to you in that aspect, right? But again, you can see we can build a Python application, we can build an F# application, we can build a Visual Basic application, right? So we can do all these different things all within Visual Studio, right? So the one we're working with today is called Ursula, and it's our internal robotics project here and program here to engage students. And we use C# and Visual Studio, and we use SQL Server for our database and things like that. And it's a good example of a real world type application that we work on. So to give you an idea of what an application would look like just in general, if we just bring up a browser and we type in Ursula, now Ursula comes up as New York Tech's kind of robotic project. And if we log into to the system, basically it comes up with a user form. We put in our username and password, and then it logs into our remote control, and we kind of click our buttons to make the robot go left and right, and we can actually make the robot say things, and we can type in a word and say, you know, hello, and say it, right? And then we can go and look up in the developer section. We can actually go and go to our code testing center, and we can see that somebody typed in, right, just right now on October 17th at 1:24, which is us, we typed in hello and it stored it to a database, right? So we can access that. This is Visual Studio and C# and SQL Server all working together, but at the cloud-based level, right? So all these different things that we can do while working in this environment are all done at making changes on the server once and then having them distribute to whoever accesses it from whatever device. Very, very powerful concept. Something that you're probably used to today, but myself being older and coming from the old days of doing things as early as mainframe programming, where we use COBOL and Fortran and Pascal on those machines. The entire interim process of going into client server is now kind of going by the wayside, because it's everything they want everything to be in the cloud where you can edit it and update it at one time only. All right, so just to give you an idea of what happens with the robotic program, Ursula is our homegrown kind of robot that we built, but as the software sends commands to the main database, the main API, the robot is following those commands internally in our lab right outside my office here. So the tool itself that we build in C# allows people to interact from anywhere in the world, any classroom. We work with high school students to control the robot, and all remotely. You can come to the lab and control the robot, but you can also do it remotely. So we built the web interface to be able to do that. Right? So let's give you a concept of what we're talking about, what we're looking at. And to give you an idea of the remote control that you just saw, if we go to our Ursula project, and we go to our remote control application here, I'll just give you an idea of kind of what this stuff looks like. So if we go to the remote control ASPX page, everything is named as ASPX and Active Server page. Every page has its own two other files. One is called a CS file, which is its C# file, and one is called the designer CS file, which is the designer piece. So all the different kind of CSS scripts and everything else that we use are in designer, but also the coding itself that we use for C# is all in the CS file, right? So every web page that you create has 3 separate sections. The purpose of that in industry is that you have web designers that want to make something look nice and pretty. Then you have highly technical people. I don't mean to sound that way, but understand. And then you have hardcore coders that just want to, kind of program and get things functional, interacting with the database and all that. And then you also have designers that want to do standardized coloring and stuff like that for the system. And all three of those people can work independently as long as they communicate what the names of those fields and functions and methods are, right? So if we look at a page like this, it looks very, very much like HTML, but it's ASP, right? So it's active server page code. And what active server page code does is that once it sees ASPX, the actual server, the IIS server on Windows, it's called Internet Information Services. It's a web server for Microsoft, for the Windows operating system. And IIS will basically say, okay, this is an active server page, so behave like you're an application on the user's appliance device, but basically run everything on the server, right? So the active server page format and the extension, as soon as it's read into the server, it behaves differently. There's also an HTML, there's also a TXT file, there's also a CSS file. Each one behaves differently, but active server page means it behaves like a real application that you would have installed on your local machine. So you can do things you normally couldn't do with an HTML page. So it's always, kind of great to look at code and realize there's something behind the code, but really in today's day and age, we want to see what it looks like. And what you'll see is it looks very similar to the actual interface we just saw, but this is the actual look and feel of the design piece that we're looking at, right? So when we say, okay, we're going to click on this button and make the robot go straight, well, this is the actual button, and here is all the details of the button. We could change the color of the button, we could change the style of the button, we could change what the button does, we could change the image of the button, right? This is all kind of configurations to make the button look like we want it to look and where we want it to look. But if you double click, you go into the code behind, right? You go into the C# code and what that button is doing. And this is where the kind of magic happens, where we're taking normal code that we're all used to from like our Java classes in New York Tech as an example, but C, C++, and now C#. The same way we design, go up to the top here, the same way we design, we use using instead of import. You used to import probably from Java classes. We use using. We bring in packages and then we have namespaces or main classes. We have partial classes. We have methods. We have variables. We set them up as types. This is a double variable instead of an integer or a string. We have conditionals, right? We have comparators, so you're greater than or less than. We have redirects in web. So we actually have things where we redirect data from one page to another, right? So we jump from page to page versus bringing up different forms like you would in a Windows form. And the other thing we have is very important, is called sessions. So what you have is you have something called sessions in web design, where the web server, whether it's Apache or IIS or whatever, you need sessions to be like public variables. So when you're coding an application, normally you have public variables that once they become a variable, every other class and every other method can use them and see that they're there. In the web application, you need sessions. The server has to store that session so it's available, so that other web pages can see that that's a public variable. So if you want something to be available in other pages as you go from page to page to page, you have to store it as a session and not just an internal variable. So you would have, variables like SL are the actual internal variable, and the private variable that you would actually have for this particular program, this button, as an example, but the sessions are available from page to page. All right. So this is kind of your world. This is the world where we're kind of coding and everything like that. But what we're doing is we're linking it back to design pages, right? And then on top of all that, what we really want to do is we really want to link it back to some sort of data. We want to actually access some sort of data somewhere, somehow. Right? Now, the data isn't part of the application. Data isn't part of the project. The data is part of the database system, right? So we have a database system with tables and indexes and fields and records and rows and columns, right? The same way you would think about data, but we have to be able to attach to that very easily from our application. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically create a new page. We're going to call it whatever, and we're going to create some of these web-based type tools. So you can see how your web page starts to emerge and starts to look. And then we're going to start interacting with a database that's real data, and we can see how that works. All right. And now I'm going to go into that piece of a transition to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to projects. I'm going to add a new item. And in this case, we always like to have our kind of title bar always showing, but everything below it changes. It just makes it more like a program running on your computer. So it's a website, but it really behaves more like a program on your computer. So what we do is we choose a web form that is going to be a new web form that do something very specific. But we're going to have a kind of a home page that's a bar across the top that behaves that way. So we're gonna call this one. Let's call this one interest. This is the interest program, so we will call it interest. And just call it that. And then it's going to ask us what we want the main site to be, which is going to be the main title bar. And we're going to go ahead and call it site master. And when the new page comes up, it really just comes up as whatever the main page is, like the site master page looks like this, but there's nothing else in the main content section of the page, right? So if we were to kind of go and say, like, let's put the word test in here, we would be able to use this particular button up here and choose which browser we wanted to test it on, or we can go to more emulators, which would be like your iPhone or your iPad or whatever emulator, however you wanted to see your web page show up and how it would behave on that device. In Visual Studio, very powerful. You can just bring that device up and show it. In this case, we're just going to bring up a browser, so I'm going to keep it as Google Chrome. And what happens is you'll notice it compiles it down here. So inside of Visual Studio, it compiles it, it checks it for any code errors first. It won't run, it won't even bring up something like this if it doesn't, if it has any kind of issues. But here, it's going to bring up this kind of toolbar, which will actually bring up, it'll bring us the ability to go home, go about. So this will always work, just like the real website, because this is the main title bar that we have that links to, that links in here. So we're gonna use that. But if you notice in the first page here, this test page, this is what we're looking at. This is the interest.aspx. So if you notice on the local web server here, where we're working on a development server, it's not public yet to the outside world. It won't be. It's more of a demo for this video. But you'll notice that like the interest.aspx page is just a blank page with the word test, but all this other stuff is the main page that we're linking, the master page, right? Which all the stuff is linked to. All right. So what we want to do is we want to have that page become a little bit more robust, a little bit more alive. So what we do is usually the first thing we do is you put some sort of a title on the page. So we'll call this the interest data demo, right? And just like everything else, you have your toolbar, so you can kind of organize your text pretty easy, and whatever you want to do, you can make it kind of as interesting as you want. And then generally what we do is we always work with cascading style sheets or CSS just to keep something standard along every page. So whenever we're using certain things, we have a cascading style sheet that says, like, this drop down is going to look like this. This text box is going to look like this. This button is going to look like this. So whenever you do add a new button, you just choose the CSS sheet, and that way the whole application maintains its standardization. All looks the same. Otherwise, you have one form over here, one form looks like this, and one form looks like that, and it becomes a little bit ugly after a certain amount of time, with a lot of people working on it, different ideas. So what we do is on the toolbox here, what we usually do is we go to something called panel, and what we'll do is we'll drop a panel over here, and that panel is going to have that panel called panel 1. By the way, we can come down here, we can call this panel interest, right? Interest. We'll call it interest 1, since we have something called interest. So we'll call it interest panel. Yeah. And that interest panel, if you notice, as long as we're highlighted on it, has a CSS class. And what we can do is we can bring in that CSS class off of something that we know is part of our design work, right? And if you notice, we use something called rounded container, and we don't really have it in here. And the reason is that we haven't included our style sheets, right? So your style sheets, your CSS sheets, are actually sheets that you determine all these different types of design specs. So what we'll do is we'll go down to our Solution Explorer. We're going to go to our source based on our source code. And in your ASP section, we're going to drop in two things. We're going to drop in style sheet 1, and we're going to drop in style sheet 2. And what that will do is give us all the different style sheets that are available. And if you double click on a style sheet, what you'll see is that it's a very simple, straight kind of sheet, but it has all these different details for every different type of CSS control that you have. So if you wanted to create one called interest 1 or whatever it is, and have it be all text is blue and all text is bold and backgrounds of fields are this. So you get to design this way so it has a look and feel. And then that file is what the designer sends to the developer, and they say, this is your style sheet. And then everything you do is you just use the style sheet. And that's how teams work together to build really good applications really efficiently using Visual Studio, because they all get to work like that as a team. So if we go back here and we go to our design feature and we go to our, let's go to our panel here. Oh, this is our panel. What we're going to do is we're going to give this panel a CSS class called rounded container. Now you see it exists because I dropped the style sheets in. We're going to call it rounded container 2. And we're going to center it. And let's save it so we don't lose our work. And now let's put something in here that we want to capture some sort of text or something like that, right? And what'll happen is, if we go to the toolbox here, notice everything that we can include here. We can do add rotators, bulleted lists, buttons, calendars, checkboxes, all these different controls that you want your website to look like a real program. You design it like this, right? You design it so it becomes part of the right look and feel, right? Websites traditionally, you think about like fancy and flashy and selling product and all that stuff. And yes, but sometimes you want to build something that's really super functional, interactive, and collecting right information. And businesses internally want to have really efficient ways to collect information internally for processing and interfacing with other systems in the building, right? And Visual Studio and C# is the best tool really in the world, in my opinion, to do that. But I'll give you an example. So if we said, all right, I want to capture 3 fields here, right? And I want to capture text box 1, text box 2, and text box 3. And I want to basically I'm going to call these val 1. I'm going to call this val 2. And I'm going to call this, I don't know, total. Like say we want to add up 2 values, right? And then let's say we want to have some sort of a button that's going to add up these totals for us, right? So what we can do is we can go to our button over here, and we can drop a button in here. That button becomes something that says, okay, and just do calculate, right? Okay, and what we want to be able to do is kind of make sure that we can separate the two up here, so we can just drag and drop and slide that down, and we can move this over and have the total become have the total become calculated down here. And when we load this up now you're going to see the same title bar in your browser, but now you're going to see the actual form start to grow a little bit, the custom form that you built. That's now it's going to be start doing something for somebody, right? Now, right now, if we typed in, this number and that number to calculate total, nothing happens because there's no code behind. The system doesn't know what to do. It captures the information very nicely. It displays it very nicely. You see this nice shadow box we have here? That's rounded container 2 because we use CSS to design that look and feel. I don't have to go and change that or customize that every single time because I just choose rounded container 2 and it just knows how to behave, right? So this will automatically resize based on a phone, based on a tablet, based on resolution of a monitor. It knows how to do that because of the CSS script that we created. All right. So so if we go into we close this now and we go into, as an example, we want to set the total value equal to the addition of val1 and val2. We have to do a couple of things. We have to collect string values. We have to change them to numeric values. We have to set this total equal to another one. So it's coding, right? We can't just make it and just wish it happened. We have to code it. So now let's go to the code behind total. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to say, all right, tval1 equals val1 dot text. Okay. And we're going to use a semicolon there, and we're going to basically make string tval1, right? And now we're going to do string tval2 equals val2 dot text. Okay. And now those two values are now captured from the fields that are typed in, and they're captured into these string values, tval1, tval2, right? But they're not numeric yet. So if I add them together, we're going to concatenate them. And I'll give you an example of that, right? So if we say that the total.text field is going to be equal to tval1 plus tval2, now that they exist, we don't get any errors or anything like that, but watch what happens. It's not really truly going to add them. It's just going to concatenate them because it sees them as string. Right? So what you'll see is that if we typed in two numbers and we calculate them, we don't really get a true sum. We get concatenation. We get the first one attached to the second one. And that's what we see as our total. Still cool that it does something on command, but on the same note, it doesn't really do what we want to do. So what we'll do is we'll move this down here, and what we'll do is we'll call we'll set tval1 equal to a numeric value. So we'll do tval. So we're going to do numeric tval1 equals convert dot to double, and we're going to do tval1. And then we're going to do double tval2 equals, let's see, convert dot to double, and we're going to do tval2. And I think I have to call this ntval, make it unique. Right, so now your text field, your total field is going to show ntval1 plus ntval2, which is great because it's going to calculate the two values. But I'm not allowed to just populate a text field with that, right? So what I have to do is I first have to do I'll do double t total equals, right? And then what I'll do is I'll say I will say total dot text equals, and I will say convert dot to string, and I will say t total. And so now what you do is you're capturing text, you're setting it to variables, you're calculating those variables, you turn those variables into numbers, the string variables, and then you're adding them together, and you're turning it back into strings so you could populate the form piece. So we'll save that, we'll turn this out up here. And if we load up the form, what we'll see is 56 and 78, and now we'll see 134, right? So now we're doing that mathematical conversion. Now, I like to take this point to just remind you that based on the fact that we're on a server and that we're on, we're using Visual Studio and that we're using ASP.NET and we're using C#, what we're doing is we're creating an application that once we publish it, the finger quote word is publish, I'll explain what that is, to our server that's really truly hosted, the entire world has access to it. So when you create an application that's going to change the world and you want the world to have access to it, once you test it and it works, it's a click of a button to make everybody have access to it. So that's the coolest thing about three-tier programming. Okay, it's also great to fix bugs. That if you fix a bug, you don't have to roll it out to thousands of users. Okay, so let's take a look at what if we wanted to show data and edit data inside of the application, but we wanted it to do through a website or a phone or a tablet, just using a browser. Okay, and what we do is we go to our toolbox and we go down to our data tools. And one of the things that we use here is we use different data lists, data pages. We have a grid view that we use a lot, right? So anytime you want to show data, like in an Amazon type format where you have like the picture and the item and the sale price or whatever, we usually use a data list or a data view. A data list or a list view. And then if we want to do something really, really clinical where we want to be able to edit and like an admin function, we usually use the grid view. So if I use the grid view here and drop this in here, it's right away going to ask me what my data source is. So it wants to know what database on what database server do you want to actually access and what table do you want to show data for. It's actually asking you. So if we say new data source and we say we're going to choose the Ursula commands, right, for the robot, and we choose the default connection string, which is every website has a default connection string which points to the one that you want to use the most. We're just going to choose that one. And if I choose the actual the bot commands table, the robot commands, and I choose the right motor and left motor and the duration, I want to see those values over time. And I might want to see the navigation ID too. What I can do is I can create a form with a data piece to it that lets me that shows me that particular data, right? So here's the raw data coming back from that table, right? It's showing me what it's going to look like. So now I click OK. I can make it look really nice. I can kind of come in and say, all right, let's go to professional. Let's make it, let's come up here and give it some, let's give it a border. Let's give it a solid border. Let's give it grid lines, right? So we can easily read the data. Let's change the actual size of it to something smaller. Right, let's increase the size of it over here so it's a little bit more broad. And then, what if we want to basically, when we look at this form, what if we wanted to actually edit that data or add to it, right? And what happens is we go to our details here and we enable paging, we enable sorting. We can go to configure the data source again, and we can actually give it a second. We want to test this one more time. And then what we can do is we can give it okay. So in this advanced section here, we want to generate, insert, update, and delete statements and use optimistic concurrency. And that'll allow us to actually edit the database inside the grid. And now what happens is we can actually enable editing, deleting, selection, and you'll see all these different items added in here. Right, so now we have a database that sits on another program, on another application. It's completely separate from Visual Studio, your program, C#. It's got nothing to do with it. It's actually its own database management system. It could be anything you choose: MySQL, Oracle, Access, flat file, whatever, you know, a spreadsheet. Wherever the data resides, the application that you're building in Visual Studio can attach to that. And what you'll see in doing what we just did, when we load up this particular form in a browser, don't forget, this is your phone, this is your tablet, this is your laptop, this is your desktop. Not only do we have the ability to kind of type in 45 plus, 78 and calculate the total like we used to, but now we can actually go in and say, let's take a look at different data that's on our database, right? This is incredibly powerful stuff. We have a browser, we have one page, we made one edit, the whole 11 billion people have the change in the upgrade. If I want to change this particular line and I go to edit, I can come in here and change the left motor to 2, and then I can update. And now that data becomes permanently stored. I didn't just edit it in my form or on my application or on my web server. I edited it in my database. So it's a permanent record of that change in that database. Right? I can sort ascending, descending. I can sort by duration. I can sort by navigate ID. I can reindex, right? So in a few clicks and drags and drops, you can do rapid application development for all kinds of software applications. Okay, so in short, we have a 3-tier application which allows you to build the database, the application, the coding, plus the design work all on the same platform. First of all, that's what web-based design is about today, right? Sure, there's other types of ways to do this. Python has its own version. JavaScript has its own version. Perl, PHP, right? You have all these different scripts that are out there that are open source. Visual Studio and Microsoft and C# and ASP.NET, they all work together. Don't forget they have their own database called SQL Server, SQL Server too. And many applications, many organizations internally just choose this one platform for all their internal operations, plus a lot of the commercial operations. There's tons of commercial applications that are sold and downloaded and running off of this as well. But this proprietary technology for the interest program is what's going to drive you, if you get really good at it, to basically be one of the leaders in the field, in a very big and robust field as well. So with that, I'm going to finish up because we're at our time. But I do want to make sure that you're aware of the remaining sessions that we have. We have Introduction to Cybersecurity as a Career, Programming with Java, Introduction to Raspberry Pi, command line usage in Windows and Linux, developing applications in Visual Studio, which is not just web applications. We're going to do desktop applications and console applications in that one. Creating and managing databases using Microsoft SQL Server, which is Microsoft's database management server. Programming in Python, introduction to Kali Linux, which is a cybersecurity operating system, distribution of Linux. Introduction to blockchain technology, data science, and quantum computing, right? So you'll be able to kind of attending these and watching the videos as we have them on YouTube will kind of give you an introduction to all these areas and could help your career. All right. With that, I thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now and open up for any questions.